I stared at my phone, my chest tightening as my world fell apart before my eyes. The screen displayed a picture that cut me deeper than any words ever could. My little sister Sarah and my fiancé Stephen locked in an embrace, their faces radiating joy. The caption read, "Can't wait for our future together." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My hands trembled, and the warmth of my home seemed to vanish, leaving behind a suffocating emptiness. The sound of the front door creaking open shattered my days. Stephen walked in, his familiar smile lighting up his face, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Stephen," I said, my voice shaking as I held out my phone. The image on the screen glowed like a cruel accusation between us. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice louder now, filled with hurt and anger. His smile faded, replaced by shock and guilt. "Nancy, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his voice shaky and defensive. I couldn't believe his audacity. "Not what it looks like," I repeated, the disbelief thick in my tone. "You're hugging my sister. How could it be anything else?" Stephen's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He scrambled for an explanation. "It was a mistake," he said, his voice pleading. "A moment of weakness. I was wrong." "A mistake?" I whispered, my pain barely contained. "You call betraying your fiancé with her own sister a mistake? That's all it was to you." In that instant, my heartbreak turned into resolve. "It's over, Stephen," I said firmly, though my insides trembled. "There won't be a wedding tomorrow." The next day, I had to face my family and share the devastating truth. We sat in the living room, a space once filled with joy and laughter now felt unbearably cold. My parents listened with stunned faces, their silence as hurtful as the betrayal itself. "But Nancy," my father finally said, fumbling for words, "Sarah is still young, she doesn't know any better. And as for Stephen, well, men will be men." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you seriously excusing their betrayal?" I said, my voice rising. "Sarah is my sister, and Stephen was supposed to be my partner. How can you defend them?" My mother chimed in, her tone soft but firm. "Honey, we understand your pain. But Sarah has always been fragile, needing extra care. She didn't mean to hurt you." Her words stung, but it was her next statement that truly broke me. "The wedding is already paid for," she continued. "And like your father said, men are just wired that way. Don't let this ruin everything." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "I can't believe this," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "You're worried about Sarah and Stephen. But what about me? Who's going to take care of my broken heart? Who's going to stand by me?" Their attempts to reason with me only deepened my hurt. Their priority was clear: protect Sarah at all costs, even if it meant disregarding my pain. In the days that followed, I felt like I was drowning. Every morning, I woke up to the weight of my family's expectations, crushing me under their desire to maintain the illusion of unity. But I couldn't keep playing the role they wanted me to. I knew what I had to do. I had to walk away from Sarah, from Stephen, and from the family who chose to minimize my pain. It wasn't easy, but I had no other choice. I needed to rebuild my life, far from the betrayal and heartbreak that had consumed it. Piece by piece, I would put myself back together, even if it meant starting over alone. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the conversation with my mother. The idea of Sarah's children asking about me brought back a mix of emotions I thought I had buried long ago. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me was touched that they wanted to know about me, but another part of me was still raw from the betrayal that had driven me away. Memories of Sarah's betrayal and Stephen's deceit played like an old film in my mind, but this time, they were joined by thoughts of Carol and Ryan, two innocent children caught in the web of a family fractured by pain. I wrestled with myself, wondering if staying distant was still the right choice or if it was time to reevaluate the boundaries I'd put in place. One night, I sat in my small but cozy apartment, staring at a photo of Sarah and me as kids. We were smiling brightly, arms wrapped around each other, unaware of the challenges that life would throw our way. It was a stark contrast to where we stood now, years and miles apart. Could I forgive her, even just enough to be part of her children's lives? Or would reopening that door only bring more pain? I thought about Carol and Ryan, about how their questions might grow into resentment if they never got to know me. They didn't choose the circumstances they were born into, and they didn't deserve to suffer for the mistakes of the adults around them. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. She answered almost immediately, her voice cautious but hopeful. "Mom," I began, my voice soft but steady. "If Carol and Ryan want to know about me, maybe it's time I met them." Her breath caught, and I could hear the emotion in her voice as she responded. "Nancy, I can't tell you how much this would mean to them. To Sarah, too. I'm not doing this for Sarah," I interrupted firmly. "I'm doing this for her kids. They deserve to know their family, even if it's complicated." My mother was quiet for a moment, then said, "I understand. Thank you, Nancy." We agreed to arrange a meeting in the coming weeks, taking it slow and keeping things simple. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps I could reclaim a piece of the family I had lost, if not for Sarah, then for Carol and Ryan. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of resolve. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I was ready to take this first step. It wasn't about forgetting the past or erasing the pain. It was about finding a way to move forward, one small step at a time. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as a battle raged within me. The memories of betrayal clashed with the image of two innocent children caught in the storm. Stephen was gone, and Sarah, flawed and broken, was left with nothing. Despite everything, the pain in her voice haunted me. I kept replaying my mother's words in my mind. Kill that selfish pride. Was it really pride? Or was it self-preservation? I had spent years building a new life, one that wasn't tethered to the pain of my past. Opening that door again felt like risking everything I had worked so hard to heal. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't bring myself to ignore Sarah's call for help. But I also couldn't walk into this without boundaries. I resolved to help. Not for Sarah's sake, but for her children. They didn't deserve to pay for the mistakes of their parents. I called Sarah the next day. Her voice broke with relief when she heard mine. "Nancy," she whispered, "thank you for calling back. I wasn't sure you would." I took a deep breath. "I'm here for the kids, Sarah. This isn't about you and me. This is about them. Let's figure out what they need." Sarah started crying, her words coming out in a rush. "I know I don't deserve this, Nancy. I hurt you so much, and I've regretted it every single day. But I'll never stop being grateful that you're willing to help." Her words softened something inside me, though I didn't fully trust them. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I was ready to take the first step toward making sure her children had what they needed. 1355. Over the next few weeks, I found myself slowly easing into their lives. I sent money for groceries and helped with the funeral arrangements. Sarah was subdued, a shadow of the sister I once knew, and though I kept my distance emotionally, I could see how much she was struggling. The children, Carol and Ryan, were shy at first, but they quickly warmed up to me. Carol, with her curious eyes and endless questions, reminded me so much of myself at her age. Ryan, quiet and watchful, had an old soul that seemed far too mature for his years. One evening, as I sat with Carol helping her with her homework, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Aunt Nancy," she said softly, "Mom says you're really brave. Is that true?" I paused, caught off guard. "Brave? I don't know about that, sweetheart," I said with a small smile. Carol shook her head. "I think you are. You came to help us even though it was hard. That's what brave people do, right?" Her words struck a chord deep within me. Perhaps bravery wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping forgiveness. Maybe it was about showing up, even when it hurt. As the weeks turned into months, I found a fragile sense of peace in being part of their lives. I couldn't erase the past, but I could shape the future, especially for Carol and Ryan. Sarah and I were far from the close sisters we once were, but we were learning to coexist, building something new out of the ruins of what we'd lost. And while forgiveness was still a distant horizon, I found solace in the fact that I was no longer running from the pain. I was facing it one step at a time, and carving out a new chapter, not just for me, but for all of us. Perhaps that was enough.
For now.
I kept questioning myself, wondering how much my pain justified refusing to help. Tormented by guilt and inner doubts, I finally made the decision to return to my hometown. Each mile I drove was filled with self-recrimination. Am I being selfish? I muttered under my breath, trying to make sense of my choice. They're just children. They're innocent in all of this. The familiar streets of my childhood felt like a bittersweet journey through time, stirring memories I had worked so hard to bury. When I arrived at my parents' house, my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. The reunion with Sarah was far from warm. There were no hugs or tears of reconciliation. Instead, it was marked by tense silence and averted gazes. Sarah showed no signs of remorse. If anything, she seemed to treat my presence as a personal victory. "So you finally decided to show up," she said, her voice dripping with cold bitterness. "I thought your pride wouldn't let you." I swallowed hard, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. "I'm here for the children, Sarah," I managed to say. "They shouldn't have to suffer any more than they already have."
"Oh, right.
"For the children," Sarah responded with a forced smile. "Well, since you're here, you can help with the funeral arrangements. It's the least you can do, after all." The atmosphere in the house was suffocating, with every conversation feeling like a battle of wills. Each glance from Sarah was a stark reminder of my pain and her betrayal. While we prepared for the funeral, I watched my niece and nephew from a distance. Carol, the older of the two, seemed confused by all the commotion, while little Ryan played, without understanding the gravity of what was happening. Observing them, I felt a tightness in my chest. I lamented the unfair circumstances they found themselves in, completely unaware of the turmoil around them. My interactions with Sarah during this time were strictly businesslike and cold. There was no room to discuss the past, only the immediate task of arranging the funeral. Sarah treated my presence as if it were merely an obligation, showing no gratitude or recognition for my efforts. At night, I would lie in bed, exhausted from the emotional toll, torn between relief that I was helping and frustration at being unacknowledged. Sarah's indifference cut deep, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. The day of Stephen's funeral arrived, heavy with a sense of loss and finality. The turnout was small, with only a handful of friends and family in attendance. The atmosphere felt oppressive, as if grief and hidden relief mingled in the air. Throughout the service, I couldn't help but notice Carol and Ryan trying to make sense of the event. Their confusion was heartbreaking, their innocence so stark against the somber mood. Carol clutched a small doll tightly to her chest, while Ryan's wide eyes darted around, searching for answers he was too young to understand. I knelt beside them, speaking softly. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to comfort them. Carol looked up at me with wide, curious eyes and asked, her small voice trembling, "Why is Daddy in that box?" My throat tightened as I struggled to find the right words. As gently as I could, I explained that their daddy had gone to a place where he could rest forever, but that he'd always be watching over them. Ryan, still too young to grasp the situation, clung to my leg for comfort. In that moment, Sarah approached. Her expression was a mix of grief and a reluctant gratitude I hadn't expected to see. Though unspoken, her presence by my side acknowledged, in some small way, the role I was playing for her children. The rest of the funeral passed in a blur of tears, speeches, and a lingering sense of finality. Despite the sorrow and unresolved tension, I found solace in the small connection I had made with Carol and Ryan. They didn't deserve to carry the weight of their parents' mistakes. What lingered in my mind were the confused, sad faces of Carol and Ryan, and the subtle way Sarah's demeanor began to shift, as if she was reevaluating our relationship. In the days following the funeral, I noticed a change in Sarah's attitude. Where there had once been cold indifference, I now saw small gestures of warmth and attempts at rebuilding our connection. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden watching the children play, Sarah began to open up. She admitted to making countless mistakes, reflecting on how immature she had been. With everything that had happened, she said, she wanted to focus on her life, the children, and repairing our relationship. I listened, surprised by her vulnerability. Sarah went on to share painful truths about Stephen, that he had never been a good partner. She described how he drank too much, was unfaithful, and hid secrets she had ignored. Her voice cracked as she revealed that Stephen had been drunk during the accident, crashing his car into a telephone pole, a lonely and reckless end. A wave of mixed emotions swept over me. Pity for her struggles intertwined with anger over the past. I couldn't help but think, that could have been me. Sarah looked at me with sincerity, expressing her desire to change, not just for herself, but for her children. She told me she wanted to rebuild our bond as sisters. I hesitated, the memories of betrayal still fresh in my mind. But as I watched Carol and Ryan playing nearby, I began to consider the possibility of forgiveness. The idea of giving them a sense of family started to outweigh my lingering resentment. With a trembling voice, I told Sarah I'd think about it. I couldn't promise anything overnight, and I made it clear it wouldn't be easy. Sarah nodded, saying she understood. She didn't expect everything to heal immediately, but assured me she was willing to try if I was. Placing her hand gently on mine, she added, I just want us to be sisters again. The rest of the day was lighter. We shared childhood stories and even laughed at old, embarrassing memories. It felt strange, like stepping into a life I thought I'd lost. I felt a cautious mix of emotions, hope, guarded optimism, and a flicker of trust trying to reignite. I arranged to work remotely for a while, allowing me to extend my stay in my hometown. My days became a balance of work and careful interactions with my family, particularly Sarah and the children. Although my relationship with Sarah had softened, I often found myself watching her from a distance. The weight of the past still hung over me, making it hard to fully let my guard down. As I observed her playing with Carol and Ryan in the garden, I couldn't help but question whether I could truly trust her again. At the same time, financial pressures began to mount. Sarah, struggling under the weight of Stephen's debts, frequently came to me for help. She would avoid my eyes as she explained her need for money, for the children, the household, and daily expenses. I empathized with her, but the growing frequency of her requests made me feel trapped. My parents also seemed to assume I would step in to support her, as though it were an unspoken rule. One evening, over dinner, my father remarked that I was so successful, helping Sarah a little shouldn't be a burden. I tried to remain calm as I explained that I was already helping, but I had my own obligations to consider. My mother, ever the mediator, added her own input. What responsibilities could a single woman without children possibly have? She asked, her tone dismissive. She reminded me that Sarah had lost her husband and was in a difficult place. Each new request weighed heavily on me, leaving me torn. I began to question whether my family truly needed my support or if they were taking advantage of my willingness to help. Am I being used? I wondered, grappling with doubt and frustration. Still, I continued to assist, for Carol and Ryan's sake. They were the innocents in all of this, and I couldn't bear the thought of them going without. My heart ached for them, even as my trust in Sarah and my family remained fragile. I didn't want the children to suffer more than necessary, but with each passing day, I felt the fine line between helping and being exploited growing increasingly blurred. Weeks turned into months, and the dynamics in my parents' house shifted even more toward me taking on responsibilities that Sarah simply couldn't manage. When Sarah could no longer afford her apartment, she moved back in with the kids to our parents' house, adding to an already complex situation. I was so focused on helping, especially for the sake of Carol and Ryan, that I didn't notice how deeply I was being taken advantage of. The bills seemed endless, and I was constantly relied upon to cover them. My mother would ask me to help with things like the electricity bill, using a tone that made it nearly impossible to refuse. Despite feeling weighed down by these mounting responsibilities, I convinced myself it was temporary. This is just until things stabilize, I kept repeating, trying to suppress the growing unease. Meanwhile, Sarah's dependency on me continued to grow. She began making casual comments like, "You wouldn't mind helping with the kids' school expenses, right?" Her tone was so matter-of-fact it felt like a slap in the face each time. One afternoon, while taking out the trash, I noticed a man working in the yard next door.
He was tall,
with slightly messy brown hair and an easygoing demeanor. He paused his work and approached me with a friendly smile. "Hi there," he said, extending his hand. "You must be Nancy, the Wallace daughter, who just moved back."
I'm Tustin.
His casual familiarity caught me off guard, but I smiled as I shook his hand. Justin gestured to the house next door and explained he lived there. Offering his condolences for my late brother-in-law, he said, "I know it must have been a tough time for your family." His kind words brought a bitter reminder of all the circumstances that had led me back here. I forced a polite smile and thanked him, admitting things had been complicated. Justin kept the conversation light, asking if I'd had time to reconnect with people or explore the neighborhood. I told him I hadn't been out much since coming back, working remotely and handling family responsibilities. There was something oddly comforting about Justin's relaxed demeanor. He shared that he also worked from home and offered to show me around the area or grab a coffee if I ever needed a break. His warm smile felt like a rare breath of fresh air in the suffocating atmosphere I had been living in. I smiled back, genuinely touched by the offer. "I might take you up on that sometime," I said. As Justin headed back to his yard, I returned to the house, my mind lingering on his invitation. For a brief moment, I let myself imagine a life beyond the walls of my family's home, a reprieve from the never-ending responsibilities. But the weight of those responsibilities only grew heavier. With Sarah and the kids now firmly settled at my parents' house, every day brought new expenses and challenges. Reluctantly, I found myself further entangled in the household's financial burdens, paying bills and covering the necessities. One morning, as I was making coffee, I overheard my parents talking in the living room. My father was grumbling about the rising costs of running the household, and my mother sighed, saying, "At least we have Nancy. With her good job and no other responsibilities, she's been such a help." Their words stung, a sharp mix of frustration and sadness rising within me. Did they truly see me only as a source of financial support?
Did they even consider the toll it was taking on me?
Needing to escape, I stepped out onto the terrace. The fresh air hit my face, a welcome contrast to the stuffy tension of the house. As I sat there, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions, I noticed Justin walking by. He spotted me and approached, his familiar smile lighting up his face. "Hey," he said warmly. "How are you holding up?" I forced a smile, relieved by the interruption. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed how overwhelmed I felt. "Just a lot going on." Justin's expression softened, as though he could see through the facade. "Sometimes, it's okay to not be fine," he said gently. His words stayed with me, offering a moment of clarity in the chaos surrounding me. Justin shook his head with a soft chuckle, leaning back in his chair. "Nancy, it's not about affording it. You need this for yourself. You've been putting everyone else first for so long. It's time to do something for you." His words struck a chord deep within me. I felt a pang of guilt for even entertaining the idea of taking time away, but at the same time, the thought of escaping from my overwhelming life was undeniably tempting. "I'll think about it," I said, smiling faintly. Justin grinned, his eyes twinkling. "That's a start." Over the next few days, his suggestion lingered in my mind. Every time my family asked for something, money, time, errands, I found myself wondering if it was truly my obligation to keep saying yes. One evening, as I sat with Carol and Ryan helping them with their homework, Carol looked up at me, her young eyes full of curiosity. "Aunt Nancy, why don't you smile as much as Uncle Justin does?" Her innocent question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized how much the stress of the past months had weighed on me, even in front of the kids. "I guess I've just been really busy," I replied softly, trying to reassure her. But you should do something fun, Ryan piped up. Mom says people are happier when they have fun. I laughed lightly, ruffling his hair. You're right. Maybe I'll try that. That moment stayed with me. If even the children could sense my unhappiness, maybe it was time to start prioritizing my own well-being. The next morning, I told Justin I wanted to take him up on the idea of a trip. His excitement was contagious, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about something too. We planned a weekend getaway to the mountains, a short but meaningful escape. When I told my family about my plans, the reaction was as expected. You're leaving?
Now.
Sarah asked, incredulous. What about the kids? What about everything you've been helping with? I'm not abandoning anyone, I replied firmly. But I need this break. I need time for myself. My mother chimed in, her tone heavy with disapproval. It's so unlike you, Nancy. You've always been the dependable one. Don't let a little infatuation make you forget your priorities. Her words stung, but I refused to let them deter me. I'm still dependable, I said, my voice steady. But being dependable doesn't mean sacrificing every ounce of happiness I have. I'll be gone for a weekend, not a lifetime. Despite their grumblings, I packed my bags and left with Justin. As we drove away, a sense of liberation washed over me. The weight of my family's expectations seemed to lift with every mile. When we reached the mountains, the fresh air and breathtaking views were everything Justin had promised and more. We hiked, laughed, and shared stories late into the night by the fire. For the first time in years, I felt alive like myself again. That weekend wasn't just an escape, it was a turning point. It taught me that prioritizing my own happiness wasn't selfish, it was necessary. When I returned home, I didn't let my family's guilt trip sway me. I began setting boundaries, helping when I could, but no longer sacrificing my own well-being for their endless demands. And slowly but surely, I reclaimed my life, one step at a time. That evening, as the sunset bathed the house in a warm golden glow, I made a decision that would change everything. I knew I couldn't stay in this environment any longer. But leaving wasn't just about escaping the manipulation, it was also about reclaiming my sense of self. Over dinner, I announced my plans to move back to the city. My voice was calm, steady, but firm. I've given this a lot of thought, I began, meeting their surprised gazes one by one. It's time for me to return to my own life. I've done what I can here, but I need to focus on my future now. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. My mother was the first to respond, her voice tinged with disapproval. Nancy, how can you leave now? Your family needs you. We're not out of the woods yet. Sarah chimed in, her tone sharp and defensive. So that's it? You're just walking away? After everything we've been through? I held my ground, unwilling to let their guilt tactics sway me. I'm not walking away, I said firmly. I'm choosing to set boundaries. I've been there for you, Sarah, for all of you. But I can't keep sacrificing my own well-being. It's not sustainable and it's not fair. My father, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was quieter, but there was an edge of frustration. We thought we could count on you, Nancy. You can, I replied. But not like this. Helping doesn't mean allowing myself to be taken advantage of. I'll always care about this family, but I need to start caring about myself too. The tension in the room was palpable, but I could feel a sense of empowerment rising within me. For the first time, I was standing up for myself in a way I hadn't before. That night, I packed my bags. The next morning, I said goodbye to Carol and Ryan in the garden. Their innocent hugs and laughter were bittersweet, and I promised them I'd visit whenever I could. As I drove away, the weight that had been pressing down on me for months began to lift. I knew this decision wouldn't be easy, and I wasn't naive enough to think my family would suddenly see things from my perspective. But I also knew that, for the first time in a long time, I was choosing me. When I got back to the city, Justin was there to welcome me with open arms. You did the right thing, he said gently as I stepped into his embrace. And for the first time, I truly believed it. From that day forward, I vowed to rebuild my life. Not for my family, not for anyone else, but for myself. As we drove away, the weight of my family's betrayal began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of freedom. I glanced at Justin, his reassuring smile steadying my nerves. This was a step toward healing, a break from the toxicity I had endured for far too long. During our trip, I found solace in the quiet moments and breathtaking scenery. Justin had chosen a remote cabin surrounded by rolling hills and serene woods, a place where the noise of my past couldn't reach me. Every morning, we took long walks along forested trails. The crisp air and rustling leaves seemed to whisper promises of renewal. Justin's kindness was a balm to my wounded heart. He listened without judgment, offering support without overstepping. One evening, as we sat by a crackling fire, I opened up about everything: the betrayal, the guilt, and the lingering sadness over leaving Carol and Ryan behind. Justin leaned closer, his voice soft yet firm. "You've done more than enough, Nancy. You can't pour from an empty cup. This time, focus on filling your own." His words resonated deeply. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope for myself, a chance to rebuild, to live on my terms. Over the following weeks, I began to feel lighter. The physical distance from my family gave me clarity, and the emotional support from Justin became a cornerstone of my recovery. Though I missed Carol and Ryan terribly, I reminded myself that I couldn't save them by sacrificing my own happiness. Instead, I resolved to be strong and set an example of resilience, someone they could look up to one day. The trip wasn't just a getaway, it was the start of a new life. Slowly but surely, I was finding my way back to myself. One night, as we lay on a blanket under the stars, I turned to Justin and asked him, "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Justin gently squeezed my hand, his voice calm and steady. "What matters most is that you're doing what you need to do for yourself. That's always the right thing." Those words stayed with me as our trip unfolded into something extraordinary. We visited a serene coastal town where golden sand beaches stretched into the horizon, and the warm sea welcomed us like an old friend. Our days were spent exploring the natural beauty of the area, enjoying long walks, and indulging in local delicacies. At night, we watched breathtaking sunsets while sharing laughter and heartfelt conversations. For the first time in years, I felt free, truly free. With each passing day, I discovered parts of myself I had long forgotten or never realized existed. Justin was my unwavering companion, kind, patient, and always finding ways to bring a smile to my face. It was during a quiet, candlelit dinner, with the sound of waves crashing gently in the background, that I realized just how deeply I had fallen for him. Reaching across the table, Justin took my hand, his eyes warm with sincerity. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," he said. "These past days have been some of the best of my life." Looking into his eyes, I saw my feelings mirrored in his. "I feel the same way," I admitted, my voice soft. "You've brought light back into my life when I thought there was none left." That moment marked a turning point, a step toward a future I could finally look forward to. As the trip drew to a close, my heart raced with anticipation as I asked Justin if he'd consider moving back to the city with me. His smile was as warm as ever when he said, "I'll go anywhere with you." True to his word. Within a month, Justin had tied up loose ends, rented out his house, and moved in with me. Justin was everything I had hoped for and more, a partner who supported my choices, respected my boundaries, and encouraged me to prioritize myself. Together, we built a life based on love, trust, and understanding. The first few years without contact with my family were bittersweet. I often thought of Carol and Ryan, missing their innocent laughter and the love we once shared. But with time, I came to accept that cutting ties with Sarah and my parents was the healthiest choice I could have made. Justin and I settled into our new life, and as the years went on, the idea of having a family began to take root in our conversations. One sunny afternoon at a cafe, watching the world pass by, I nervously brought up the idea of having children. Justin's eyes softened as he admitted he had been thinking about it too. "I can imagine raising a family with you," he said warmly. "You'd be an incredible mother." His words filled me with hope. "I've always been afraid to think about it, given my past," I said. "But with you, I feel like we could create something beautiful together." And we did. When our son Louis was born, he brought a light into my life that I hadn't known was missing. After so much pain and betrayal, his presence was a reminder of love, hope, and renewal. Together, Justin and I created a home filled with joy and unconditional love. One day, as I sifted through an old photo album, Louis came over, his curious eyes landing on a picture of me and Sarah from years ago. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing to Sarah with a childlike innocence that made my heart ache. Closing the album gently, I looked into his eyes and said, "She was someone I knew a long time ago, but she's gone now." To me, it wasn't a lie. The sister I had once adored was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer recognize. As I hugged my son close, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. My past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. My life with Justin and Louis was a testament to my strength, and I had finally found peace. I looked up from the couch and saw Justin in the kitchen, lovingly preparing something. He moved with care, humming softly as he worked. In that moment, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. With Justin, I had found more than just love. I had found a new home and a new family. Everything we had built together was rooted in honesty, support, and mutual respect. Despite the pain and loss I had endured, I realized that it had all led me to this moment. I had found my true place in the world, surrounded by the warmth of a life I had chosen for myself. As Louis played nearby, laughing with the unfiltered joy only a child can have, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known was possible. With Justin and Louis by my side, I was no longer defined by the betrayals of my past. Instead, I was living proof that love, strength, and resilience could build something beautiful. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you new, heartfelt stories almost every day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.